Do you feel that in a time when we are more connected than ever, we are drifting away from real human connection, especially to ourselves? I do. Hi, I'm Leticia Latino, and I want to invite you to join me and my very inspiring guests in exploring ways to reconnect to your essence, to your definite purpose, to what makes you tick. Are you ready? Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of Back to Basics, Reconnecting to the Essence of You. I'm with Debbie Ausburn today. She's a social worker who has worked with youth servicing organizations for more than 40 years. She currently works with youth organizations defending lawsuits, assisting with internal investigations, and advising clients about best practices for child safety. She's a co-author of Protecting Other People's Children, 120 Days to a Strong Child Safety Policy, a book that reflects the best practices that they have learned in child welfare. Hello, Debbie, and welcome to Back to Basics.
Hello, and thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you today.
Well, this is certainly, as a mom and as a decent human being, so to speak, a very important subject. Of course, we want children and child safety. It's, something that I know we are all very concerned about. But before we get into the meat of that subject, let's learn a little bit about you. 40 years doing the same thing, that's a long journey. So share with me, if you would, a little bit about your young years. How was young Debbie? What did she dream about? What did you aspire to become?
Well, early in life, my parents were very involved with youth ministries in our church. And so I just grew up helping mom and dad with that. There were a lot of folks that they gravitated to. Back then, they called them at-risk kids. And so I just sort of grew up in that milieu. And then when I was in high school, I started college originally thinking I was going to be a pre-med student and be a psychiatrist. And I hit organic chemistry and decided that I felt a calling.
I what this is going.
That's right. And decided that being a doctor was not for me. And switched my major to being a speech major. Then after I got out of college, actually my major was speech education. I enjoyed being a teacher, but I started out as a social worker right after college. And I just burned out and decided to go to law school. When I was in college, I was on the debate team, and I discovered the magic of trends of changing what my argumentative streak. I was able to by moving into debate and then moving into law school. I was able to take what was a character flaw in some contexts and turn it into a life skill. And something that could make me money. And so I've thoroughly enjoyed being a lawyer, but I've stayed involved working with kids. I've been a foster parent. I've been on boards of youth organizations. I've been a volunteer, and then I have just sort of naturally gravitated towards advising them as sort of in my legal practice. All the different strands of my life have eventually come together.
That's fascinating, especially having heard that you grew up in service and grew up in youth ministry and giving to others. So that I think it's something that's beautiful, important, and the way that you found to marry all those things with something you're good at, something you're passionate about, sounds like. And doing work that matters, because obviously this is work that matters. I'm sure that it's very difficult, I'm sure, and just by the essence of what you do. But I know you advise many organizations. We're going to get, you have there's a page, there's blogs about this, and I'm sure that any particular subject about child protection and all that can probably be hours and hours of a podcast. But let's
Yes.
start with one of the well, your book. That's, I think it's a good, you decided to co-author. So besides obviously putting all this knowledge and savviness into a book, was something inside of you saying, because a lot of people say, I want to write a book, and people say, I cannot write a book. And I don't know who I heard that say, any one of us has about 7 books in us.
Yes.
So how did the whole book journey came about?
Well, it came about with my first book was Raising Other People's Children, which was about my experiences as a foster parent. But then I've spent a good chunk of my life defending youth organizations against allegations. I'm a litigator, so I've spent in defending youth organizations in lawsuits against allegations that their policies weren't good enough to protect the kids that were in their care. And so I saw a lot of different things that my clients should have done, and I just sort of gradually transitioned into advising them about how to avoid meeting me at the back end. Sort of a listen to me now and you won't have to pay me later. Sort of advice. And then my co-author, who's also my law partner, used to be head of Georgia's Child Protective Services, and he's been involved in leading a lot of different youth organizations. So his experience compared to mine, but between the two of us, we sort of spanned the waterfront. With our respective experiences. And so that's what prompted me to write the book and to get him on board with his experiences actually running an organization. I've never actually run an organization. I've just told people how to do it. And so between the two of us, we can, in our book, advise folks about, like I said, how to avoid ever needing to hire me as a lawyer to defend them in a lawsuit.
That's so interesting. So, so basically you have, you work with these organizations, you've seen them at their best, at their worst. What would you say is like early signs that something is, not working or not, like these people need me? Like, what are the I would call it, if I was in sales, like the sweet spot, like you say, they need my help.
Well, I think a lot of it is when folks just get overwhelmed. And I've run into so many organizations that just don't even know where to start. They have this vague idea that they need to have a child protection policy, but they look out what's on the market, and it's $2,000 for a 2-day training, and then you have to go back and write your policies. And or these trainings that if you invest a lot of time and money, it can overwhelm you. If you don't have the time and money, you just hit the high spots with the training that's available. So we realized that, I could say to my folks, no, I know you have a small group and a small organization, but that actually means that your task is much smaller than a large organization, because you can do smaller tweaks, smaller policies that fit your organization. And that has been my main focus, is making sure that folks understand that there's a lot they can do that fits their organization. And so we our mantra is to adapt, don't adopt. Because the other sweet spot is I have a lot of organizations, they have a policy somewhere, it's stuck on a shelf, and they pass the binder from one person to the other, but nobody really quite knows what's in there. And if you do a child protection policy right, you can make it a living part of your culture, and it's actually easier to do that with smaller organizations than it is larger.
That's such a great point because I believe in this day and age, even for insurance purposes or anything, you go online, as you said, you buy the standard boilerplate, you put it on a binder, and this is our policy, but basically it's policy on paper.
Right.
How do you advise her? I know that could be, that's why we should buy your book, but what would be like simple things, like what's your starting from moving from that policy on paper to something that actually protects kids?
Well, the first thing you do is, I mean, you have to do a criminal records check. It's sort of like vaccinations. You don't really catch a lot of people, but you have to have it. And then the next thing you do is to make sure your staff understands the boundaries, the behavioral boundaries, and the reason why. And for example, one of the things that folks will always say is they run into is you have a 2-adult rule. That we're always going to have 2 adults with kids at all times. Well, small organizations don't have the money to hire twice as many people as they need. So a 2-adult rule it's going to be one that they may have it on paper, but nobody's ever going to be able to follow it. So we encourage them to look at the principle behind that rule, which is you don't allow adults to isolate themselves with kids. So how can you do that in your organization? You can do it through extra supervision. You can do it through requirements that there's also, I'll give you an example. If you're a camp with nurses, the nurses have federal regulations. They can't just let anybody and everybody come sit in the room and hear what's going on with that kid. It has to be one-on-one. But with the nurses or anyone else, you can have a requirement that they always be within sight and sound of other people. So you may not be able to leave the door open, but you can have a window that you always have the blinds up, or that you have if you're counseling kids in a private setting, that you do it. I use camps, for example, that you require them to do it, sitting out in an open area where people are not within earshot, but they're walking by, they're within sight of it. Teachers, you can require that they never shut the door if they have kids come in during their break to work with them tutor them on their classes, that they always leave the door open and they never take the kids into any area without a door. You can require things that get to the same place with not isolating kids. And so those would be the rules that you would need to look at. What would work for our organization to meet this principle? And then you build your policy from that.
Interesting. And, this is one of those subjects that some people get to like, oh, we're taking this too far. This is so much, like I know that I am fingerprinted to be a volunteer in my kids' school. Right. I fingerprinter, I read something every month. But I have to say, every time I read, I learn something I didn't know about a particular subject. So there is some, hard truth about that. But are there any, doing the work you do, are there any, hard truths that you say, yeah, this sounds like a lot, but, these things really happen. These things, are there things that people, it's almost like out of sight, out of mind kind of mentality where we pretend that maybe I don't even want to think this is possible, but in reality, the exposure, it's a high risk?
Yeah, I think the thing that there's 2 things. One is, I think you're right that it is possible to overprotect kids, and we've done a lot with that. And so now we have kids who, they don't know how to be adults. They're very fragile. They don't know how they don't know how to handle failure because we don't let them fail. They don't know how to handle conflict because we're so intent on protecting them from bullying that we don't understand the difference between bullying, which we do have to take care of, and conflict, which kids need to learn how to handle. And one of the things that I think we don't want to think about that actually does happen a lot is grooming for abuse, which is people that we, as parents, trust and are glad to see adults taking an interest for our kids, particularly if the kids are vulnerable or single parents who need, who want good male role models in their kids' lives or those sort of things. And it's very hard for us to find the balance between recognizing a predator and accepting a healthy mentoring relationship. And the problem is mentoring relationships are really good for kids. The healthy relationships are incredibly positive, and we want to have a good coach, a good teacher, a good volunteer in an organization take an interest in our kids. So we do a lot of work in our book and in our online courses in explaining how you can tell the difference between a healthy mentoring relationship and a predatory grooming relationship, because the grooming and the predator, they do happen, and it's very hard for us as adults and parents to recognize when someone has malign motives, because we just don't want to think about that. And we don't want to become paranoid and lose good relationships that could benefit our kids because we're overcompensating. So but both things are happening.
I understand. And you're totally right, because I see this. I have a 15-year-old, and when I hear like teachers taking interest in, they ask me to do this. And you don't want to become that parent that's like, why did they ask you to, stay later? Or why were you alone? Or were there other kids? The mere fact that we're asking those questions, even if you kind of do it like, like you're not really asking, but you're asking, they at that age, they know you're onto something. And now you planted a seed that maybe you don't want to plant, but there's like no easy way around it, like, because you're not there with them. So you cannot just see and then make your own opinion about what you see. So I just think it's super difficult to protect them. And especially, as you say, because you do learn that a lot of these sad cases come from the people you trust the most.
They do. I cannot tell you how many times I've had organizations say, well, except for the abuse, he was one of the best teachers we ever had. Oh. And that probably is true, because they really are stellar at charm and all of those things. But there are also a lot of non-predators who are charming and take an interest in kids and care about them. And that's one reason we always encourage our client organizations, when you have boundary rules like teachers can't have kids stay later unless there's a group of kids or something like that. Make sure the parents know what those rules are, so that if the kid says, oh yeah, the coach wanted me to stay later, you can say, I thought that was against the rules. That's a much better way to approach it than, really, just you alone. If you can say, I thought the rules were X, Y, and Z. And that also, the organizations, we only have so many staff. If you can co-op, I don't want to say co-op, if you can collaborate with parents, you have that many more eyes on the situation and that many more people recognizing rule violations and boundary violations. And boundary violations are one of the three things that we talk about being a hallmark of a predator as opposed to healthy mentors. Healthy mentors stay within the rules and stay within boundary lines.
Well, that's very helpful. I think I'm going to take that with me for the future. Like, whomever doesn't stay within the boundaries, then okay, maybe that deserves a little bit of a red flag. Exactly. So I wonder now that, everything is changing for everybody around the world with technology and all these things. You've been doing this for a long time, and now you get also the fact, not that this is not new, but obviously online, it's a perfect environment for this to hide and to groom and to all these things. Just the other day I made my 11-year-old girl read an article about Roblox and with everything that's happening. And I say, this is why, and I want you to understand, and this is not only here, it can happen anywhere. And you want to make it, that it's not just one game, one thing, but the idea that there are bad people out there, and we need to make sure that you understand that there are bad people out there. So how is that changing the dynamics on your counseling, advisory, and how you have to adapt yourself into this new digital world?
Oh, it has changed everything because, predators are like bank robbers. I think I can't remember what famous bank robber, when asked, why do you rob banks? He said, because that's where the money is. Predators go to where the kids are. And so now that kids are online, they go online. And it's very hard for organization and parents to find them and to see them. And don't get me started on Roblox and some of these other things. I wish there were a way consistent with the First Amendment in the U.S. to get rid of all of them, but we have to have trade-offs. But as organizations, you can, again, set up rules and let parents know what these are. For example, we don't let our staff like or follow or connect with kids on Instagram or TikTok or any of the others because we can't supervise that. If our staff, if teachers want to email kids about their homework, then they have to include the parents on there. If they want to, if you want to meet with or contact kids about a group thing that we're doing, then you set up an online group that includes everyone, and all of the messages are broadcast to everyone, and parents can join if they want to, and administrators are always included. So you always have either parent or administrator eyes and access to all of the messages, and that is key. I know there are times that kids will want to talk to the staff about, they may disclose abuse that's happening at home. Well, in that case, the administrator needs to know about it anyway, because then you've got mandated reporter issues, and it's not going to stay just between the staff and the child. So you need to train staff how to respond to that. But other than those kind of situations where a child is in danger, you need to have outside adult eyes on the situation as often as you can get it. And sometimes just the fact that administrators and parents are included in the group or the email is enough to keep the predators away from it. And then it can be a red flag if a person is violating the rules by inviting the kid to a private chat or emailing them directly or any of those kinds of things. So, you look at that from an administrator point of view. You just have policies that limit the one-on-one access, the same as you would in person. And then as parents, you just have to keep an eye on it. Use a lot of the parent protection programs that are out there, a lot of the parent settings that various apps give you. And I don't have kids at home anymore, so I've lost track of what all those are. Yeah. But as a parent, you just have to. It takes more time to be a parent these days, and I think honestly, if we would spend more time watching our kids online and limit their online time and send them outside without worrying so much about strangers abducting them, which doesn't happen often, by the way. Go back to the more unrestricted physical world that our kids used to have. And then we could spend our time focusing on what are statistically the much bigger danger, which is online.
Mm. That's so valuable, very, very good and valuable information. And yes, I mean, even as parents, you say like, while I was raised in a very conservative, my parents kept it, but I was given a lot of independence as well.
Yep.
So I always struggle with, I don't want to be checking where my kid is through the app and knowing every single moment, because I would have hated that. So I try to use the same standards that growing up I was expecting to have, and the trust being at the center of everything. But I do have to admit that our parents didn't have the whole messaging thing. So I do audit my kids' messages from time to time, which doesn't make me feel good about, reading what they write to each other. But every so often I say, this is the only way I have to know. If there's anything here happening, if there's anybody grooming them, if there's any person I don't know on this list. So it's also like you're forced to do things that are also maybe not the ideal, but there are not that many tools that we can use at this stage to protect them. Also, I much rather do that and not without them knowing, that being on top of them, asking them and harassing them about how, who you're talking to, where you're going, and then let me check on your 360 every 2 minutes to make sure that you are where you're saying you are.
Right. Yeah, it's tough, and I know honestly, every parent has a different parenting style, but I think that what we need to do is a lot of it is just getting our fears in line with reality. And I think, for example, the chances of our kids being abducted by a stranger is less than their chances of getting struck by lightning. Their chances of being groomed online in one of these apps that we're not paying attention to is much higher. Mm-hmm. And we same with my clients who are administrators of youth organizations. We only have 24 hours in a day. We even our best intentions cannot. I can't find a day expander on the market that I can buy anywhere, and so we have to put our efforts and our fears towards the things that research says are the biggest issues. And so for administrators, statistically, child-on-child abuse happens much more often than adult-on-child. Not that we ignore the adult-on-child, it's just we can't forget about the child-on-child issues. As parents, we really need to focus less on the news about, somebody in Walmart almost kidnapped my kid, which usually is made up, and concentrate on my kids in this virtual world where there's all sorts of adults pretending to be 12 years old. That is real, and that is statistically an issue. And cyberbullying is statistically an issue for our kids. So, yes, I understand you do make a choice sometimes to just check on it, to check on what's going on without them knowing it may be better than asking them about it.
Yeah, I come to agree on that. But and thank you for sharing some of those higher risk, like as you mentioned, child abuse, which a lot of us think, well, if they're with their friends or if they are with people we know, people that they are fine. And I have to say, my own courses that I've taken, I was blown away by statistic. I think that's always good practice as parents. Go look at the statistics of where these, what's happening out there, so that you can also make more informed decisions as to how you want to parent your child. Is there any one thing, like if you meet somebody and they learn what you do and they say, give me advice on, like, I'm just, my kids are growing. What would be like your 2 or 3 things that you like say, watch for this?
Well, the thing that I always say to my administrators is that the second worst thing you can do is not have a child protection policy. The worst thing you can do is have a policy that you don't apply. So you really need to make sure that your child protection policy is a living part of your organization. Otherwise, it's just a minefield sitting there waiting for some plaintiff's attorney to go tromping through it. So with administrators, that's always my first thing is make sure that you have a policy that you are actually following. With parents, I always say, let your kids learn how to fail. So it's sort of like we don't want our kids to play in the street. But on the other hand, a kid who always has an adult swooping in and solving their problems for them, they never learn how to solve their own problems. And so you have to let your kids learn how to fail safely so that they dig themselves back out of it. And that's an incredibly important learning process for them.
I love that. Learn to fail safely. That's a power statement right there. So thank you for that. So I'm just curious, a lot on the adults, especially, sexual abuse and stuff like that. You have a little bit the ironics, the non-believers that say, they're taking advantage of this, they're taking advantage of the system. And in your experience, are the majority of the cases where you have situations like these real, or do you think also that there are some circumstances where as human beings we try a little bit to stretch the truth or abuse the system as well?
It depends. In the vast majority of the cases, when kids disclose that they are subsequently, it turns out that they're telling the truth. Now, kids do lie, but their lies are usually not really sophisticated, depending on their age. What I find is the problem is you get overreactive adults who misinterpret what kids say. Number one, and then they well-meaning adults will question kids and corrupt their memories. So you get kids who are younger, and the parents say they don't ask open-ended questions. They don't say, what happened? Tell me what happened. They say, did so and so touch you? Did it happen during this time? And I've seen cases where kids say, I don't want to talk about this. Can I go out and play? And the parents say, well, you can go out to play when you tell me what happened. Well, the kids know, okay, I want to go out and play. If I'm going to go out and play, I have to give my parents the answer they want. Obviously, they want me to say yes, so I'll say yes. And then it just goes from there. I don't see any malice in those situations. I really don't. It's well-meaning folks all the way around. So I don't ever see folks, I shouldn't say I never, but I rarely see folks that I think are lying, but I see a lot of people who just don't understand how kids' minds work. And there are accusations that I think never happened. And when I dig into it and follow the process of how the disclosure was made, it's a lot of well-meaning people making a lot of mistakes. That's what I see most often. Either it did happen or adults just completely screwed up the disclosure.
And that makes total sense, even in normal business environments. Like when something happens and you backtrack into the whole food chain, so to speak, into the information and communication, you always find, like how the version and the truth, and it's never like straightforward. So that's very valuable feedback. So Debbie, I know we've been talking a lot about this very relevant topic. Is there anything that you're working on that maybe we haven't touched upon that you want to share with the audience? I'll share the book link and of course where to find you. But is there anything else that you want to share with the audience maybe?
No, just they can get more information. We have a blog at if you go to ysoacademy.com, there's a link there for our blog, and you can sign up for our newsletter. And I do a lot of this news is out, or I do a lot with here's a story that hit the news, and here's the case study. Here's the principles we can get from it. And so there's just a lot of information out there, and we try to keep it in small, manageable bites, because otherwise you're just drinking from a fire hose. It can be incredibly hard.
Of course. No, and this is, it's such an important work, very inspiring. I'm really happy you're sharing this, because again, if you are running an organization and you don't have this thing in place, or you need to take a second look, this is really like a wealth of information and something that touches everybody, really, because there's kids everywhere. So usually, my last question of the show is, what makes you tick? I imagine that sometimes you have to go to court and litigate a case like this, and you get drained and you lose hope in humankind, just by seeing the things that maybe you have to see and learn. What is it, something that helps you feel good and touch your soul and your spirit?
Oh, I think the chances that I have to actually come in contact with folks who really love and care about working with kids. I always say my clients, I love working with them because, well, first of all, they're much nicer people than the lawyers I usually work with, or the lawyer that I am. Mm-hmm. And I'm always inspired by their passion and their commitment to working with their kids. I tend to be a little left-brained and empathy challenged, and can get just very. My sister, who's a counselor, calls me. It says I'm from the Rip Off the Band-Aid School of Therapy, and it always inspires me to work with the people who are on the front lines with the kids. They're really just amazing people.
Great. Well, that's, I'm not surprised why you love what you do so much. And I thank you for, I'm very happy that there's people like you out there in the world keeping our children safe. And I thank you so much for sharing your journey and the work you do here at Back to Basics.
Thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And to all of you out there, thanks for joining, and please rate and review if you enjoyed the episode. Take care.
You've been listening to Back to Basics. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. If you haven't yet, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on Apple Podcast or any of your favorite streaming platforms. This is the best gift you can give us. Join me next week for another Back to Basics conversation. And if you want to find out about other exciting things I'm working on, visit LeticiaLatino.com. Thank you, and until the next time.